Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
How you doing, buddy?
Good. Yeah, I haven't seen you for a while, but it's good to see you again.
Man, where have you been? Where are you at right now?
When was the last time we talked to each other? That would have been like fall, right after the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. As of right now, I am not in my normal abode. I am in Ukraine.
Oh, really? It's a really tourist-laden location recently, I've heard. Cool.
Yeah,
So you're on
I
the
mean,
ground seeing stuff.
Yeah, that's why the lighting is bad and the walls are generic so that we can play the game.
That's interesting. So what are you doing, or what's going on in Ukraine? Like, what's up, man? What's up?
It's a good question. What are you doing? Now, I'm going to put on my philosopher hat and answer your question with a question. And you asked, what are you doing? And my question is, what do you think people are doing here? It's kind of the best way to say it, actually.
I like it. So what are you seeing that when I'm hearing all these crazy stories about media journalism right now? So you're actually there. So at least I can you can validate, is anything that we're hearing over here in the West, does it bear any resemblance to what it looks like?
Sometimes I don't know, because even being over here, I've been over here for about 3 weeks. And it's almost like a detox. I don't really know what people are talking about as much back home. I know there's things with like Biden laptop and that certain people are being called Russians and that. But one thing that I do know is that there's something that's the same here that it is back home, is that there's a lot of information that's getting spread around. The word propaganda is probably like number 2 on a Google hit list. I mean, so you're having a lot of information getting spread, and it's very, very vastly different. Like, you've got things from 2,000 people died here today to like a car blew up, and it's very hard to pin down where it comes from. And then sometimes things are just immediately dismissed. Like, I understand that this happened, and someone will say, that's just Russian disinformation. So if people are asking about what's going on over here versus what's going on back home, the thing that is the same is it's very hard to tell. What is true today may be false tomorrow, and that's not necessarily the propaganda. It's just how quickly things are changing. A good example of this would be, we saw a reporter for a rather well-known news agency in a place that was otherwise not attacked and was left kind of alone. And he was standing by his camera, smoking with his crew or hanging out. And then all of a sudden he realized, it's like, okay, time for me to do my talking piece. And he goes into this elaborate description of the terror raining from the sky and people running for cover, and everyone else in the neighborhood were looking at him like he was crazy, because that wasn't happening. It hadn't happened there. At the same time, people have had what would have already been tragic was made more tragic, because the boy cried air raid siren too many times, and then the people were like, oh, whatever, and then someone gets killed, and we don't want to see that. So that's kind of that's like a bit of a nutshell of what's going on. It's very chaotic and it's very hard to read, and it's not very hard as in like me, an intelligent person, I know what's going on. It's like I am here seeing things very closely, and even the reports are hard to comprehend because they're so vastly different.
Right. I'm hearing that there's 2 narratives completely opposite of each other. So one saying that one side's winning, which makes sense that it would have it in a narrative. The other says, get this, the other side's winning. Does it look like any of the sides are winning?
No, I don't have anything tangible to say that.
Yeah.
Rather, I think instead of hearing the question asked of who's winning, we often hear, how long do you think this is going to go on? Right. So just a kind of a slight shift. I was with some Germans a while ago, and with us there was a local Ukrainian gal, and we asked her a similar question. She said, no, we'll win. No questions about it. It's just a matter of time. And it wasn't like patriotism gusto. It was, yeah, we're going to win this. It'll be fine.
But we have Yanukovych in 2014. You got a crisis going back 1,000 years. How much longer then? Well, how much more time is this until this is a peaceful place?
I don't know if it can be. I don't know if it can be. I think it can. Some days I think you could be more optimistic about it, but I don't know. I don't know if it can be peaceful in the sense of like, it's a region it's kind of like a European not European, it's such a gateway area, and it makes sense why, from a national understanding, why Russia would want to have this territory, because they get to shore up their defenses. It makes them much more of a defendable state. Otherwise, I'm not the only person who said this, but it makes sense why Russia would want this territory, if nothing else for strategic grounds. It's got resources that are very valuable to it. It allows it to have a stronger power over other nations, and those resources are going to be valuable to anybody, and there's no such thing as creating a world where there's no need for resources. So that's an element, but you also have kind of an East meets West thing going on. And so maybe not peace in the sense of like peace, but harmony is probably more likely, where I think harmony is much more achievable.
So right now, harmony seems pretty, I mean, we've got this Cuba crisis where we're trying to shut down the Western economy from any participation with the Russo economy. But at the same time, there's humanitarian aid coming into Ukraine from the West all over the place. What is that helping? What does that look like right now?
Yeah, humanitarian aid is complicated, and that's not an easy cop out. But it is a case. I mean, you have people coming in under the guise of humanitarian aid to make a quick profit or make themselves famous. I think that is a reality that makes people very uncomfortable. There are people who are presenting themselves as humanitarian aid for ulterior motives. Oh, look at me, I'm going to go save these people, and you're bringing stuff they don't need. At the same time, there's corruption within forms of government and issues where people want to get a cut of the deal or the money. So it's very, very, very thorough. It's dense. So an example of this is you have a feedback loop going on right now. Is you have Westerners coming in, some of them, not all of them, in fact, not the majority of them, but you have a vocal minority of Westerners, although that's a little bit of a generalization, and they're coming in with this sort of hero complex. Yeah, I'm going to go in, Ukraine's just like America. Everyone trusts you, and no, they don't. The Ukrainian people do not trust people. And part of that is the ghost of communism. They remember when everybody was an informant. And the other issue is people come in there and they try to take advantage of them. I think one of them is the president. Spicy.
Okay, but then there's also the lack of support from the president officially and from NATO officially, and Ukraine trying so hard to do whatever they had to do, bend over backward, I think is the term, in order to join NATO, and not getting accepted. What's up with that, and where does that leave them in terms of weapon support and how they're going to get through this?
I think it's dangerous to get cynical. Getting cynical about it is very dangerous. And I think if I were to be, what is the meme right now? The Megamind meme, big head guy thing. If I were a strategic analyst for Russia, my objective would be to break the will of the Ukrainian people and break their trust with the West. Cut off their access to Western medicine, wealth, economy, trust, government, not even governance, but relationships, and seed distrust amongst the population so that they would be more willing to consider federating with Russia. And that sounds like a pretty big strategy. And quite frankly, that seems like it could very well be a strategy. Now, the good news is the solution is actually quite simple. And I think the Ukrainian people, at least on the individual level, are engaging, are doing it well. And they believe in their people. They believe in the Ukrainian people. They believe in the Ukrainian identity. It is definitely something that if the Russians were addressing, they miscalculated horribly, which is not a surprise.
So I guess you look at the Ukraine like an Iraq situation where there's different kinds of people that are living in different places, but there legitimately seem to be like the Donbas Republic and these areas that are very pro-Russian. And we were saying Yanukovych had been wanting to support Russia or become closer to Russia at the end of his term when the European Union was kind of dismissive of Ukraine. So is it maybe the West's or the European Union's fault? Who do we blame for the situation?
Blame. I'm actually going to say I don't think I have the answer to that question. I came here because I had most of my experience has been in Afghanistan and a little bit in Iraq and that environment. And so I was able to, after a number of years there, I was able to understand a lot more of what's going on. I don't have that time here. So when we talk about 2014, I think it would be arrogant to say that I know these kind of things about like the long history of Ukraine. What I can say is that there is the Ukrainian government and there's the Ukrainian people, and those are not the same groups of people.
Does it remind you of Afghanistan or Iraq in the way that the conflict is run, or that the way that there are foreign influences? Is it different?
No, it's different. There's a name, there is an enemy, they have a name, they are a people, they carry a flag. They are invading, they're entering somebody else's country. So that's different. What is the same is that it's not exactly the same, but as we're dealing with in a conflict sense, whether it's violence or war, probably since World War II and the atom bomb, insurgency is the name of the game. And the problem with insurgency is it's very easy to say, oh, that's just insurgency, it's just terrorism. It's not even it's an answer that's not an answer. So I'm not saying, I wouldn't say that the Russians are engaging in insurgency. In fact, I think a lot of the Ukrainian people, their natural suspicion is antithetical to that, where it's very defensive against it, very white blood cell. Because everyone here, the state of the Ukrainian people is suspicion. If you're not from here, whether it's from my village or in a country, in a larger city, from my country, why are you here? What are you doing? Is the main question. It's the police are stopping people on the street and searching them and taking their stuff and camera. If you have a camera, they'll take your stuff out. They'll take your memory card out of your camera.
I mean, definitely is a really important thing. I mean, right now you never know. Yeah, and if you got international players that are coming in, you have to be careful about your country.
Yeah.
Where does that leave people that wanted to help Ukraine? They're coming over as journalists to bring information or to help in other ways with the humanitarian aid or joining the military. I guess there's also the Ukrainian Volunteer Legion.
So you identified three things. You identified journalism, humanitarian aid, which let's just say that's resources and things like medical and food, right? And then you have the more military-esque side of things, whether you want to call it training or paramilitary. The first thing that has to be said is don't be naive. And when I say that, I don't want to say that I don't mean to use that as like a talking down to, but if you come here as an American and if you come here as an American and you will be taken advantage of. 100% you'll be taken advantage of if you're not keen and paying attention to things, whether it's like an easy example, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. And not all of the people who are taking advantage of the situation some people who are taking advantage of the situation are from America. Absolutely. Scooping people up. Oh, you want to go fight for the Ukraine and you're on a bus you're on a bus to go get outfitted with people who may or may not even have the resources to do what you're thinking you're going to do. And if you're a military, former military, if you're thinking that you're in shape and you want to go engage in that kind of activity, it is not a gentle concept, to be very, very clear. You are not getting put into an American military with American resources.
How is this going to be different?
You don't have the infrastructure. If you're given a weapon, it might break and it might not. These are questions that are like, well, first of all, you're not bringing a weapon into the country. That's very fair. And so you don't know, you do not have a supply line. Like anyone who's been in the American military knows that the American military buys from the lowest bidder, generally speaking. But even a ratty M4 that's been around since the beginning of the GWAT is not a bad thing if it's reliable. Not everyone is reliable, but you kind of see where I'm going here. Like,
are they using Kalashnikovs or what do they have?
There is a smorgasbord of you. If you're driving around the country, you will see everything from 60-year-old Kalashnikovs to FALs to double barrel hunting shotguns. I mean, it's just like, we're not talking about a professionally organized military that has been around for 30 years. What we're seeing is almost something in the coolest way is a little bit more akin to the American Revolution in 1776. Like people just kind of figured it out. And they're also figuring out that spirit and willpower is very, very, very powerful. So
What about ages of people? So we're seeing everything from reports of like Starship Troopers, teenage soldiers to 60-year-old men who are like, get me back in the field. Is that real? Is that what's...
I can tell you, I've seen men of all ages. I've seen men of mixed levels of experience in uniforms. I've seen men in mixed uniforms. And so that goes back down to not a lot of things are certain. It's very quick to miss the regularity of America, where the guy's in a uniform, you can trust the uniform, you know what the uniform means. Here it's like, that guy has had that uniform for exactly 2 days. He has had that firearm for exactly a day and a half. And now he's a provincial police officer telling me what to do. And he's afraid of his own gun. And he's afraid that I don't know, I could be anything at this point in time. Right? Is he an American pirate? Is he a, you know,
I see,
you know
that.
what I mean? Like, it just
Check his bag for spinach, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, we visited. I got to visit a beautiful church, and it was a Greek Catholic church. So it wasn't a Greek Orthodox; it was Greek Catholic, and it was in a small village of probably 50 people at most. And the singing was beautiful. After the mass, we had a gal. There was a gal there who could speak some English, and we talked to her. And she helped translate for us. And then we talked to the priest, and he was thankful. Like, we were just there. We were there to kind of be there to see what people outside of the city do. And because I mean, all the aid is going to the big cities, which makes sense because that's where the refugees are going, or the internally displaced citizens, technical term. And so but if the supply lines get cut off, the countryside is going to be affected too. So we want to see if they needed something. So there you go, a little hint, help with humanitarian aid. And what I'm doing here on the ground is I'm trying to look at things that are happening and make sure I can evaluate and look at where realistic help is actually going. There's a church run by a guy who's been there for 15 years. And he has organized a series of people, including government officials and organizations within the city, to provide shelter for the people. But we were in this little village at this time. And so we talked to the priest, and he showed us around, and it was really, really very thankful. He was quite hospitable. He didn't offer us lunch, which is kind of reasonable because we just showed up unannounced. But then when he got outside, there was literally a lady with everything but the torch and pitchfork saying that we were bad people. And it was like, I can't do anything for you. What am I supposed to tell you, lady? And she thought we were like Russian spies or something like that. So,
I mean, you're at the Catholic Church. They hate that. Okay, that's awesome. So what about the other kinds of things you've seen like that? Programs, like, have you seen any really, what are the best programs and what are the worst things?
Right now, the Red Cross isn't exactly doing anything. I'd leave them alone. Unless they've changed in the last couple of days. I've kind of been on the move a lot and on the ground. So it's unfortunate for them because they have such a good reputation. But from actually what I've seen, the best humanitarian aid that's been, and people who know about what's going on, are through the churches. It's 100% through the churches. Are like because they have the best. They have produced the best pipeline. There was a church that we had seen. We got to talk to one of the people there, and some money was donated to them to buy beds for refugees. The people who sent the money also said, we're not going to send you beds from another country. How about you put this money into the Ukrainian economy and buy Ukrainian beds? So they did. They bought 300 mattresses and beds for refugees to stay in the town until they could cross the border and get to safety and move around. So right now it's the churches. There's another one, was it Bring Them Home, I think is what it's called. They're doing pretty well, but I don't remember the name, so I can't really give it off.
It's still pretty good. So it sounds like that's pretty fascinating that the churches are building the infrastructure. You've seen that for thousands of years as well. So it seems like everything has got away. Is this a crisis that we're overinflating, or is it not so much of a crisis, or as you said, a revolution, or what is this?
We're dealing with an information war. I think that's the easiest way to say it. The primary thing is it's information. And part of that is, how do we evaluate information? Because it's like drinking out of a fire hydrant but not knowing where the poison's coming from. Is this a conflict? Is this a war? Is this as big as people are saying? I mean, a cheap answer would be saying it depends on who's saying how big it is. But it's a very real threat. It's a very dangerous thing. It's very final for a lot of people, and that's something that's very, going back to the naivety of things, it's very final. If you come here and you're naive and you don't pay attention, you may not go home. And even worse, you may not go home and no one will know what happened to you. We're talking about very much so disappeared kind of things, like no body, no one to know, and that's a very real issue where you will have no ability to tell your family what has happened, and you'll just be gone. And for some people, that's not as big of a deal for themselves. Like, I'm not afraid of, maybe they'll say something like, I'm not afraid of of conflict. They're a courageous person. It's not something to downplay, but it is, but I'm saying in the sense of naivety, don't come over here as an American thinking you're going to be a hero. You won't be treated as one. In fact, you're going to have to earn some trust. That's a challenge that the Ukrainian people are going to have to deal with, because they need to be able to trust the West, again, the generalization of the West, because they're going to need the help of the West. But you can't treat this at all like Afghanistan, because what is the American 82nd going to occupy the country? It's just, that's would not be a good look. So as the Ukrainians continue to engage in this war, and as the Russians do, this will be an information warfare, and probably one of the key things that will to help determine or close it off will be who gets quicker and better at evaluating information in the internet age.
You've also said, though, that there's been players that maybe have been mischievous from the West and from Russia. I mean, there's a reason why the government is looking into that. The Ukrainian government is trying to be careful. How much of this conflict is beyond this revolution of Ukraine, and how much of it is internationally interacted with and provoked and perverted?
What's happening in Ukraine is not necessarily the actions of governments. It's the will of the individual people. I mean, government people, individual people, small, maybe it's people who are able to do more in this conflict than it is governments. Governments are bound by treaties. They're tied in. They're tied up. They're tied up. I mean, and so there's very little that say even Biden could do that wouldn't result in something that would be so much more most likely worse very quickly. However, individuals are the ones who are winning this conflict. It's people who are coming over here with resources, people who are making alliances and friendship. And so, and that means you've got people who are doing genuine good and not running around with a banner saying, look at me, look at me. And then you have a good way to describe that I've started to think about it is there's a lot of vultures and crows in this area right now. People are circling the area because there's ways where you can make a quick $1 million and get out. And there's ways that you can become famous here very quickly. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. But there's plenty of people chasing fame and chasing wealth, because they know that that if they look hard enough, they can find some corruption and they can get some deal, or they can skim something off the top. That is not a universal. You can't become jaded and say that. And because of that, let's talk about the idea of like the Foreign Legion idea. There's a lot of information, possibly even propaganda, that's being put out about that. Everything from almost every American who's joined the Legion is dead. There was only 100 and something of them, to none of that is true, and there's 6,000 of them, and they're winning this conflict outside of Kiev. And I know that one difference between what's going on in America and what's going on here is you guys are fighting over how to call it Kiev or whatever. And people are here like, yeah, I need beans, bullets, and bandages, dude. And meanwhile, there's some dude who's halfway through the country who's like, you know what? These people are coming through to help, but like what you got there. Here, give me that watch. And so you can find corruption on all levels, and that's in some ways that's human nature. But yeah, that's a difference there. I think that this conflict is being defined by the people who volunteer, not by the people who are governmenty garbage.
In terms of disinformation campaigns, do you think how big is the disinformation campaign? Is that basically what's going on? It's just disinformation.
It's almost unreadable. It's everywhere, and it changes all the time. And it's not necessarily the will of an individual person. It's that you've got a million voices, and it is really hard to sort the signal through the noise. Yeah, you can get political about disinformation versus misinformation, but
okay, there's a value there, of course. You're saying that misinformation you have to use sometimes.
I think there's a lot of advantages that certain people can gain by lying about what's happening. And sometimes it's just they feel good. Don't be naive about it. If you're going to send money, really do take some time and don't do the ad or the post hoc kind of justification. It really is going to require some honesty. And that's really, I think that's one of the best things that's coming out of this, is that like you're dishonest with yourself, you will pay the price. And it might be the $20 you sent to a charity just went to some bureaucrat's pocket. You know, it's not a horrible thing, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, but if you're going to come over here and help, it's going to take some time. The question that people are asking over here is, how long is this going to go on? There is no end in sight, but that could change tomorrow. So you can find me on Instagram right now, and I have both of them are attached to websites. My personal one it's at Foxrow Official, so at Foxrow_official, and then and it's redacted, so you can call it Redacted LLC. There's also some merch there. We got some stickers now. T-shirts should be in the shop in a couple of days.
Be safe. Take care.
See ya.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Targaryens.
Recent Targaryen. Recent Targaryen.